Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the classic Original 62 book series, and it's book number 40, Night of the Living Dummy 3. Whew, this one, right? I have been waiting to get to this book for some time, and I know a lot of you out there, a lot of people out there on YouTube. You know who you are. This is, for a good amount of you, your favorite Goosebumps book ever. And my history with this book is that when I was a kid, my first dummy book was Bride of the Living Dummy. And back then, there was Slappy's Nightmare, but I never really read that book all that much. But I did go back and read the first three dummy books. And Dummy 3 was always one that I thought was fine. I mean, I've never really been in love with this book per se. Now the episode's a different story, and we'll get to that in the next review, but this go around reading this book, I have to say, y'all, and just be honest, and trust me, this comes from a place of fandom for this franchise as a whole. Goosebumps, I love it to death, but this book just does not do it for me all that much, even though I will acknowledge this is a good book, okay, and we'll get into what I have to unpack with near the end. If you haven't read Night of the Living Dummy 3 before, I think there's a strong chance that you might love this book. I might even say that this could be a good first dummy book to jump into, since all the dummy books, they don't really follow continuity all that much. You can really jump in at whatever point. This would be a fun one to jump into. Okay. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off with this girl named Trina. And Trina is setting up this, I guess, prank up in her father's attic, where her father is like a former ventriloquist, and now he's turned to like photography as his line of work. And she is talking with her brother Dan about Dan kind of catching her in the act and saying, "You're not trying to do any pranks, are you?" And Trina's like, "Nah." But the two of them are heading up to their father's attic to, I guess, mess around with some dummies up there. Her father has collected like 12 dummies over the years, and she kind of explains to the reader all of these dummies up in the attic, and, you know, pinpoints which one's the first one that her father ever had, and then goes through the line of them a little bit. And we get to meet one that stands out in the story named Rocky. And Rocky's kind of like this mean-looking one with kind of a grin on his face. Well, while they're up there, their father comes home, and there's like a jump scare moment involving that. And the father reveals in this bag that he brought home that he found a dummy inside of a dumpster. And the dummy has a broken face, but he said he's going to be able to fix him up and make him good as new. And there's no real name for the dummy since the father found him, and they decide to name him Smiley. Well, Smiley, you know, mild spoiler alert, ends up being the dummy we know, Slappy. And that comes later on in the book. But anyway, so they name the dummy Smiley, and they take the dummy over to the father's workbench, and the father, you know, glues on the missing face, or at least piece of the face that had broken off. And doing so, Trina finds a card inside of Slappy's pocket and reads the magical spell that we all know that brings Slappy to life. Well, after doing so, they leave Slappy upstairs because they're getting ready for their uncle and their cousin to come visit. I think their uncle's name is Cal. I could be mistaken there. I'm just going to call him the uncle. And the cousin they have is named Zane. Now, Trina goes into some exposition talking about a horrible prank that her and her brother did to Zane, I think a year prior, that scarred Zane from ever wanting to come back and visit. And while they're talking with their father, their mom joins in, and the father essentially puts his foot down and says, "Look, what y'all did to Zane was terrible. We don't want any of that. No pranks whatsoever. And you have to swear to me that you're not going to do anything. And if you do, we're going to strip away your privilege from going to summer camp in the summer. And Trina and Dan seem to, think about that because that's really all they have to look forward to. And they say, okay, and they make a genuine promise that they're not going to pull these pranks on Zane. Well, the next part of the story is when Zane and their uncle come to stay with them for a little bit. And Zane, he's this type of kid that gets scared over everything. And Dan and Trina really have to resist the temptation to pull pranks on him for some reason. They just can't be too, nice kids. But they joke around with him, and, they understand that he's afraid of everything. He's just that kind of archetype of character in Goosebumps that you'll find. He's very apprehensive and precocious a little bit. But he's taken up this hobby of photography, right? And that kind of connects Zane to Trina and Dan's father, who, runs a camera shop. And when they get there, the kids want to go show Zane around, and Zane is talking about how he wants to take pictures, and they take Zane up to the attic, and Zane gets to meet the dummies. And they can tell that he's kind of freaked out, but, he has to, coach himself to go upstairs. And while he's up there, and he's looking around these dummies sprawled across this couch in this attic, he gets slapped by one, and he goes a little frantic and says, "One of them slapped me." And the kids are like, "Come on, stop joshing around." And he's like, "No, I'm being serious." And Zane's like, I'm not having it. And he leaves, and the kids are like, "Well, I wonder what's up with that, And then Trina thinks that something feels off, but she doesn't know what it is just yet. Well, as the story goes on, one day, or I guess one night, Trina goes downstairs and finds Rocky has been placed in the kitchen, right? And the way he's posed looks kind of weird. And let's just say there's a commotion, and they're told to put the dummy away. And if they get caught moving the dummy again, they're going to get in trouble. Well, the next morning happens, and of course, Rocky's back downstairs in the kitchen again. And Trina has to run upstairs, hide him, and come back down before she gets caught and gets in trouble. And everything seems to be fine. They're having breakfast, and their cousin Zane wants to spend the day taking pictures. It's such a nice day outside, and Trina and Dan want to go outside. But Zane just wants to take pictures, so he goes around the house taking pictures. And Zane's like, "Here, you want to come watch me develop these pictures?" And the kids are like, "Yeah." And they go to this dark room where I guess their father has set up in the house because he's a photographer as well. And while they're, I guess making the negatives or whatnot, he notices that somebody has used up pretty much all of his film and had put pictures of the dummies on his roll, and is specifically Rocky. And he's like, "What kind of cruel prank is this?" And the kids are like, "We didn't do it, we swear." And Zane seems to be kind of upset. And Trina gets this idea that since it's not her, it has to be Dan doing this. So she gets the idea to go up to the attic and maybe spy and try to catch Dan. Well, she heads up there, and she gets scared by Dan, and Dan reveals that he's been doing the same thing and wants to catch whoever's in the act. And he seems to think that it has to be Zane, right? And Trina's like, "It can't be Zane." And Dan's like, "Trust me, it has to be him. Let's wait out here. We'll wait for him to come upstairs, and we'll catch him in the act." Well, as the night goes on, they're waiting up there, and they hear the noise coming up the stairs, and they figure out that it was Zane. And they catch him in the act, and they call him out on it. And Zane kind of reveals, this is like near the midway point of the book, where Zane reveals that he's been setting up these things to get some revenge for what happened the year prior. And Trina says, "Well, okay, let's just call it a truce, and let's, just move on from here." And Zane agrees, and then the three kids seem to get along. So after this halfway point, the next day they're going outside, they're all hanging out, riding their bikes, Zane brought his camera and stuff. Everything seems to be kumbaya with them. Well, when they get back, there's some stuff out of sorts, right? Weird stuff starts happening. Okay, and there's this dinner that the mom and dad are planning that night. They want to invite some neighbors over and some friends to meet Zane and his father. And the mom's going through a lot of trouble to make this dinner. Well, something happens to where the kids get some attention put onto them. And while they're arguing, they say, well, let's just go back to dinner and forget all this, right? When they go to dinner, they realize the whole dinner has been ruined, and the mom is just shaken up, and the father can't believe what's happened, right? And when they go to, when they figure out what's going on in the dining room, there's a dummy, and Slappy is sitting there, and the dad's like, take the dummies upstairs, this needs to stop, right? Well, make matters worse, there was something that happened to Zane's camera, right? And Zane seems to be really upset. That was his like favorite camera, and the dad's like, all right, you guys are really in trouble, and talking to Trina and Dan. And they can't believe it. They're like, well, it has to be Zane still doing this for some reason. So they try to catch him in the act again. Well, upon doing so, the two of them eventually encounter Slappy, right? And it's a dummy that's come to life, right? And they can't believe their eyes. And, you know, Slappy's making these quips that he's pretty much mostly known for in the, you know, Night of the Living Dummy universe. He's making quips to them, you know. There's a joke about knocking dummies down the stairs. That's kind of funny. But essentially, Slappy's like, you're my slaves. You have to do what I say. And if you don't listen to what I say, I'm going to do far worse than breaking Zane's camera. And the kids are pretty much like honing in on the idea of like, we're not your slaves. You can't get us in trouble. And he's like, well, then do what I say. And the kids freak out and they're like, we're never going to be able to go to summer camp. Like they're worried about summer camp while an inanimate object comes to life, right? Something supernatural is going on there. You think that would click in their brain, but it really doesn't. But anyway, so this sets up this final act of sorts. Zane's out of the picture. It's Trina and Dan. And there's this thing that was introduced early on in the book I haven't brought up, where there's this well outside. So kind of like the books before it, where the sibling characters get together, take a dummy, and go dispose of them outside. Trina and Dan take Slappy and try to dump him down the well. Well, the next morning, they get up, and Slappy's downstairs covered in water, and you have to take him back upstairs, and Slappy's like, it's not going to be that easy to get rid of me. And then it comes to the final act, where they all get up to the attic, and Slappy may or may not be up there, up to some schemes, and they get the idea to take the card, or try to find the card that had Slappy's name on it, to maybe read it to get him to shut off. You know, other characters in past books have tried this, and of course it doesn't work. And Slappy's like, well, see, that's no way to defeat me, and because you tried, I'm gonna have to punish you. Well, when they read that, all the other dummies in the attic may or may not have come to life, and something happens with all these dummies and Slappy, right? I'm not going to spoil what it is. And the situation seems to resolve itself, and the ending kind of comes around and wraps up with Zane is leaving, saying goodbye. Zane found out something from the final act to kind of use it against Trina and Dan, and they pretty much have sour grapes with Zane, let's just say. And before Zane leaves, Trina and Dan's dad promises them a going away gift, and Trina decides to take it in her own liberty to give Zane something to take home with them. And that's essentially Night of the Living Dummy 3. Okay. So, this book, right, while it's a really engaging read, it does kind of retread some things. But I want to get some positives out there before we get into some negatives for me. I really dig the writing style. I think in terms of Prouse, this is definitely probably the best dummy book in terms of Prouse. The imagery, the atmosphere really clicks on. This attic setting is really dark and gloomy. You get this sense of wonder within this house. The way, Trina describes, her surroundings. She's not really going into a monologue per se like Amy Kramer did from Dummy 2. She's not really deep at all. She's kind of superficial, and so is her brother. And I guess that's how the way they think. But she is very involved in the story, and the story carries. It's very easy to read. I mean, I blew through this book, and that's a testament to it. The writing's really great. The Prowse is really great. The atmosphere is great. Slappy, when we get to Slappy in that reveal, when he changes his name from Smiley to Slappy, his quips are genuinely funny, and there's some iconic moments and some lines that Slappy says in this book. And yeah, I mean, you can't really ask for less when we come to Slappy for this book. But my negatives kind of outweigh my positives in some ways, and we'll get into that. First off, people say that Night of the Living Dummy 2 retreads the first book, and that's why they don't like it. But after reading this, I'm like, does Dummy 2 really do that? I mean, this book legit copies the plot structure of the first book almost verbatim. Okay? You got... But it does do some things that to kind of subvert it. The dad is the ventriloquist hobbyist instead of the kids, which is kind of refreshing. But other than that, these two siblings, get a dummy. They have a point in the story in the middle part where it's recontextualized to being pranks, but instead of them pulling the pranks on each other, it's their cousin pulling the pranks on them because of revenge for the previous year. And that makes the whole first half nothing to do with the dummies. And then when you get to the second half is where the dummies actually kick on, and the stakes usually get higher. But, it's just not as iconic as the first book in the second half. I mean, I don't mind having the midpoint reveal just recontextualizing the whole first half, but when we go into the second half, thinking back on the first Dummy book, that whole second half was iconic. It was brilliant. Genuinely brilliant. It gets really dark. It ends on a really good note. Very iconic. This, you see some sort of character development. You see some sort of coming together. And you think that these kids are bonding over this experience. And, there's some growth there. But all that growth just gets slowly dismantled as the second half goes along, and they kind of revert back to square one where they were in the first half, kind of deflating that. But putting that aside, I think there's a lot of missed opportunities from the first half that did not carry over to the second half. The first thing is, Slappy comes to life. They read the spell really, really early in the book, and we don't see Slappy actually alive until the second half, deep into the second half of the book. And because of the first half being Zane is the one pulling these pranks to get revenge, I feel like the missed opportunity there is Slappy is the reason why Zane is doing this. Maybe Slappy either put the thought in his head or is making him do this because he thinks Zane is a slave. Anything, right? And it makes it feel like the card read in the beginning is just there to kind of shoehorn in, like, okay, the dummy's coming to life. Now, dummy's the suspect. But I think that gets all thrown out the window when everything that happened with, Rocky being found in the kitchen twice and Zane's camera having the dummy photos on it gets recontextualized to Zane doing this as a prank. I feel like you might as well just have the card read in the middle of the book at that point. I mean, like I said, it's just wasted opportunity. And going into the second half, I think it's, on one hand, disappointing to see these characters, they've come together and then it's becoming dismantled because things keep happening. But it's another when you completely leave a character out of the final act. And I think that if Zane was actually there in the final act, or some type of reveal with Zane was there, I think that could have elevated this book up to greatness, because I felt like after the midpoint there was something missing, and I was still holding on. I'm like, okay, well, it's revealed that Zane's doing these pranks. I'm hoping there's something more to this, but it never comes, right? And not to mention, we have all these other dummies. We have all these other dummies in the story, right? They're being used for pranks throughout the story, and then at the end, where we get a potential glimpse of them potentially coming to life, maybe or maybe not, and it feels so rushed and kind of anticlimactic, especially after the ending. The reveal kind of makes it feel like, okay, well, what's become of these now? I mean, what actually happened, right? Are these potential dummies still alive? What happened to them? We don't know. And I feel like they were also underutilized in the final act. I felt like they came in the very tail end of the story. Now I will say this. The final act does get kind of suspenseful when this event happens, but it's very rushed. And I wish that there was more time to marinate and kind of divulge into that. When you see this cover full of dummies, right? I would expect a book with a bunch of dummies being alive in it. And getting in at the very end of the book, I mean, I guess it counts, but I'm kind of disappointed there. And yeah, so yeah, I have some negatives with it, but I don't think it's like anything to say that it's just fine. I think it's a pretty good book still. I have no issues with any of the characters, really. Minus the fact that the relationship kind of gets dismantled. But other than that, Trina, Dan, Zane, all fine characters. The dad is a good change up to the dummy formula. And I guess another fun change up that the story does that the other two didn't do is the fact that, I don't know how to put this without spoiling it. There's multiple dummies here that, you know, kind of make a presence than just one other singular dummy, right? That the family happens to own. But from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'm going to be honest, y'all. I didn't really know where I should put this. This was a really tough one for me to rate. I was leaning anywhere between a 3.8 and a 4.2, which is like a C to C plus to a B to B minus, right? And I know that might sound low to a couple of you, or maybe even a lot of you out there, thinking I might be shortchanging this book. I think this is a good book, but I also think it has more issues than, let's say, Dummy 2. Dummy 2 is just really repetitive, but it has a fantastic monologue, has a lot of symbolism to it, it has some tense moments. It does have a little wonky thing in the final act, but other than that, I think the story came full circle and it was really brilliantly told. Here, I just feel like it's a bunch of missed opportunities. That's why I'm thinking putting it this low. But I was leaning a 3.8 to a 4.2. And after thinking about it, if this book had Night of the Living Dummy 1 quality final act, I would probably give it at least a 4 or higher. But it just doesn't. I mean, but I still think it's good. And so I decided against giving it a 4, and I gave it between a 3.5 and a 3.9. But I did end up giving this book a 3.9 out of 5. I think this is a high good book, a C plus of a book. And trust me, I'm speaking with a lot of honesty here. I don't believe I'm lowballing this book. I think this is a very good book for, I mean, not a very good, but a good book for what it is. I think with a couple tweaks, this could have been a legendary book. But I don't know. It's just, to me, it's just lacking a few things that I wanted to see done. And I just feel, I don't know, kind of disappointed with it. But still a good one nonetheless. I will go out of my way to recommend it because it's a well-written book, has great atmosphere. And yeah, that's all you really need to get into a Goosebumps book, essentially. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Night of the Living Dummy 3. Let me know down in the comment section. Do you love this book? Do you hate this book? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.